Somewhere in Milan, a decision was made, a decision that would send shockwaves through a fandom of hundreds of millions of people. But before we get to that decision, let's ask a few questions first. When a luxury house picks the face of its brand, what exactly are they buying? Is it a jawline, a body of work, a reputation, or something harder to name? Because here's the thing, inside BTS, there is no shortage of members who wear couture like it was made for them. There are members already famous for haunting editorial stares, members already whispered about as muses long before any contract was signed. So when the announcement came, when it was Kim Seokjin's name attached to Gucci and not one of theirs, a question rippled through fan communities everywhere. Why him? Was it timing? Was it strategy? Was it something Gucci saw that the rest of us didn't? And the sharpest question of all, the one we're going to spend the next half hour answering honestly, when a fashion house as old and as storied as Gucci looks at 7 members of the same group, all globally famous, all commercially massive, what actually tips the scale? Stay with us, because the answer is more layered than anyone expected. Let's set the scene properly, without hype, without spin. On August 7, 2024, Italian fashion house Gucci confirmed what fans had been quietly speculating for weeks. Kim Seokjin, known worldwide simply as Jin, the eldest member of BTS, was their newest global brand ambassador. The announcement came through a joint post alongside portraits of Jin in pieces from Gucci's Spring-Summer 2025 menswear collection. Gucci's creative director at the time, Sabato De Sarno, released a statement to accompany the news. He didn't talk about sales figures. He didn't talk about social media reach. He talked about warmth. He called Jin's personality truly magnetic. He called him a generous and extraordinary artist. Notice what's missing from that quote. No mention of runway experience, no mention of an edgy fashion persona. A creative director, choosing the literal face of his house, chose to talk about kindness first. That detail matters. Hold on to it. We're going to come back to it. Now, to understand why this decision surprised so many people, you need to understand where Jin sits inside BTS's public image. He is the oldest of the 7 members, born December 4, 1992. He debuted with BTS in 2013, and for over a decade, his reputation has been built less on brooding high-fashion mystique and more on something almost opposite: humor, self-deprecation, and an almost aggressive amount of charm. This is a man who nicknamed himself Worldwide Handsome as a joke and then let the joke follow him for the rest of his career. This is a man whose most quoted line in interviews is essentially him complimenting his own face on purpose as a bit. So when the discourse asks, why Jin when there are others who could be seen as more deserving, what it's really asking is this. In an industry that often prizes cool detachment, why would a legacy fashion house bet everything on someone who built his image on comedy and warmth instead? To answer that, we have to go back further than the Gucci announcement itself. We have to go back to the year that changed everything for Jin, the year he essentially disappeared from public life entirely and came back to a world that had, in his absence, been quietly falling for him all over again. That's where our first open loop begins, because what happened in that missing year is not what most casual fans think happened. Let's talk about that gap, because it's central to this whole story. In December of 2022, Jin became the first member of BTS to enter South Korea's mandatory military service. By law, every able-bodied South Korean must serve between 18 and 21 months, and for years there had been public debate over whether BTS, as cultural ambassadors who had brought unprecedented global attention to the country, might be granted some kind of exemption. In October 2022, the group's agency confirmed no exemption would be sought. All 7 members would serve. Jin went first. He didn't ask for a spotlight on his way in. Reports from the town where his basic training took place described a quiet arrival with only reporters and a handful of banners marking the moment. His bandmates saw him off with a simple, heartfelt message: go and come back well. For 18 months, Jin was, in the most literal sense, off the map. No new music, no red carpets, no interviews. Just a soldier fulfilling a legal obligation like millions of South Korean men before him. And then, on June 12, 2024, he came back. The discharge was emotional, and Jin didn't try to hide it. Wearing his uniform and a black beret, he embraced his fellow servicemen before walking out to a base in Yeonchan, Gyeonggi Province. Later, during a live stream that would draw more than 3 million views, he admitted something simple and human. "I cried during the ceremony," he said. He wasn't performing for that live stream. He was just relieved. He talked about how the 18 months had actually been meaningful, meeting people, forming bonds, doing something outside the bubble of global stardom for the first time in over a decade. His bandmates were there too. RM greeted him with a saxophone, playing one of the group's biggest hits as Jin walked free. This is the version of Jin that re-entered public life in the summer of 2024. Not a manufactured pop idol relaunching a brand, a 31-year-old man who had just spent a year and a half doing his national duty, visibly moved to be back among people who loved him. Keep that image in mind because it's going to explain a lot about what happened next. Discharge Day wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a very fast few months. Weeks after his release, Jin traveled to Paris. Not for fashion, not for music. He was there as a torchbearer for South Korea during the 2024 Summer Olympics, a genuinely significant honor carrying real national weight, separate from anything to do with BTS or entertainment. And it was around this same window that rumors of a Gucci partnership began circulating. According to reports, shortly after Jin's discharge, Gucci sent flowers and gifts to BTS's label as a welcome-back gesture. Nothing official, no contract confirmed, just enough of a signal that fans, who are professionally skilled at reading tea leaves, started speculating. 2 months later, the speculation became fact. On August 7th, Gucci confirmed Jin as its newest global brand ambassador. Here's the part that's easy to miss if you're not paying close attention to the timeline. Jin didn't walk out of the military and directly into a waiting fashion campaign. There was a gap, a window where nothing was confirmed, where the industry was watching, and where, by all appearances, Gucci made a deliberate choice rather than a reflexive one. This wasn't a rushed press release timed to capitalize on Discharge Day headlines. It came weeks later, after the Olympics, after the noise had settled a little. That detail matters for our central question. If Gucci simply wanted to ride a wave of Jin is back excitement, they had a much bigger, much louder moment to use. Discharge Day itself, with global media already watching. They didn't use it. They waited. Which raises the tension we open this video with. If it wasn't about timing alone, then it was about what? To really understand that, we need to zoom out and look at something ARMY has been quietly debating for years. Which member of BTS actually owns the fashion conversation? Because the answer isn't as obvious as some critics assume, and understanding the full picture is the first step to understanding why Jin's name ended up on that contract. But this is only the beginning. What happens when you actually line up all 7 members' fashion resumes side by side is more surprising than most people expect. Let's do something the discourse rarely does honestly. Let's actually look at the full picture instead of picking one comparison to make a point. By the time Gucci named Jin their ambassador, BTS was not new to the luxury fashion world. In 2021, Louis Vuitton signed all 7 members together as brand ambassadors, and the group wore custom, color-coordinated Louis Vuitton suits to the 64th Annual Grammy Awards in 2022, a moment fashion critics still reference as one of the most photographed group looks of that award season. But individually, the members had also been branching out. Jin became a global ambassador for both Dior and Tiffany & Co. V partnered with Celine and later with Cartier. Jungkook was named a global ambassador for Calvin Klein. Suga became one of the faces of Valentino. J-Hope was announced as a Louis Vuitton ambassador in his own right, separate from the group deal. Notice something here. This isn't a story about one member being the fashion one while the rest sit on the sidelines. Every single member of BTS had, by 2024, secured his own individual luxury partnership. The premise embedded in a question like, why Jin when others are more deserving, assumes there was a clear fashion hierarchy with an obvious top candidate Gucci somehow skipped over. The actual landscape doesn't support that assumption. There wasn't one empty throne with an obvious heir. There were 7 different artists, 7 different brand identities, and 7 different houses making 7 different bets. So if the field wasn't lopsided as some critics suggest, the real question isn't why not someone else? It's what specifically was Gucci looking for and who matched it? And that's where Jin's actual public identity becomes relevant, not despite the jokes and the self-declared nicknames, but because of them. Here's a story that tells you more about Jin's brand than any spec sheet could. Back in 2017, at a press conference for a BTS concert, a reporter asked Jin a fairly ordinary question. His answer became legendary. He introduced himself unprompted as worldwide handsome. He later admitted the title was entirely self-given, something he came up with himself, half-joking, and then simply never let go of. Years later, sitting across from Jimmy Fallon on The Tonight Show for his solo television debut, Fallon asked him directly where the nickname came from. Jin's answer was instant, and it brought the house down. "Because I'm so handsome, I gave it to myself," he said. That's not a fashion house's marketing copy. That's a man who has spent nearly a decade being unapologetically funny about his own image, turning what could have been vanity into something disarming and likable. Fans don't call him worldwide handsome because they think he's insecure about it. They call him that because he made it a punchline everyone gets to enjoy with him. This detail is not a footnote. It's central to understanding Gucci's stated reasoning. Remember that quote from creative director Sabato de Serrano? His warm and kind personality is truly magnetic. That's not incidental language. That's a direct description of exactly the persona Jin spent years building, publicly, consistently, without ever needing a stylist or a campaign to manufacture it. A luxury brand's global ambassador isn't just a mannequin who wears the clothes well. He's a walking extension of what the brand wants people to feel. And what Gucci said, in plain language, is that they wanted people to feel warmth, magnetism, approachability wrapped in artistry. Not detachment, not edge for edge's sake. If that's genuinely the metric, then the conversation shifts entirely. It's no longer who looks best in couture. It's who can make millions of people feel something when they see the campaign. And on that specific metric, Jin's decade of built-up goodwill is not a side note. It might be the entire point. But personality alone doesn't build a global ambassador deal. There's another piece of Jin's story that rarely gets discussed in these debates, one involving numbers, not means. And it goes back further than most people realize. In May 2019, years before any of this Gucci conversation existed, Jin quietly became a member of UNICEF Korea's Honors Club, a recognition reserved for donors who have given at least 100 million Korean won to the organization's causes. He didn't announce it with a press tour. Fans found out almost by accident because Jin had been supporting the cause largely under the radar. This is worth sitting with for a second. Long before global brand ambassador was ever a phrase associated with his name, Jin was already operating the way brands hope their ambassadors will operate off camera, quietly, consistently, without needing applause for it. Contrast that with how the public conversation around luxury ambassadorships usually works. Fans debate red carpet looks, magazine covers, editorial spreads. Brands, on the other hand, are also quietly running background checks on reputation, on how a person behaves when no one's grading their outfit. Jin's file on that front had been clean and frankly admirable for years before Gucci ever entered the picture. This is one of our open loops closing a little more. We asked at the start what a fashion house is actually buying when it picks a face. Increasingly, the answer looks less like best photographed member and more like safest, warmest, most consistently well-regarded member. Those are not always the same person. Some critics might push back here and say, fine, Jin is likable, but is he actually still relevant as an artist? Isn't a global ambassador supposed to represent cultural momentum, not just goodwill? Let's test that claim honestly, because it's a fair question. In October 2022, right before enlisting, Jin released his debut solo single, The Astronaut, co-written with Coldplay. It became his first solo entry on the Billboard Hot 100. 2 years later, after his discharge, he returned with his first full solo EP, Happy, released in November 2024. The lead single, Running Wild, debuted at number 53 on the Billboard Hot 100, his second solo entry on that chart, while also reaching the top 5 of Billboard's Global 200 chart and climbing to number 25 on the UK's official singles chart, his highest solo chart position in the UK to date. The album itself sold over 850,000 copies on its first day in South Korea, breaking Jin's own previous solo sales record. It featured collaborations with an unusually international cast. Take That's Gary Barlow, members of Japanese rock band One O Rock, and a duet with Red Velvet's Wendy, suggesting an artist deliberately reaching across genres and borders rather than resting on nostalgia. So no, this wasn't a case of a brand betting on someone coasting purely on charm from a decade ago. Jin returned from 18 months of military silence and immediately proved with actual chart data that his commercial pull hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown more versatile. Put the pieces together: a proven chart performer, a quietly generous philanthropist, a globally beloved personality built on warmth rather than mystique, and a man who had just spent a year and a half serving his country and came back more emotionally resonant to fans than ever. That is not a weak profile for a global ambassador. That is arguably an unusually complete one. But there's still a piece of this puzzle we haven't touched, because Gucci wasn't just picking Jin in isolation. They were making a much bigger, much more calculated move in an entire region, and Jin's deal was only one part of it. Look at who else sits alongside Jin in Gucci's ambassador roster, and a pattern starts to emerge. Hani of New Jeans, actor Lee Jung-jae of Squid Game fame, actress Park Gi-young, musician Jay Park. This wasn't a one-off signing. This was part of a deliberate, sustained push by Gucci to deepen its cultural footprint in South Korea under the direction of a creative director actively reshaping the house's global image. Seen this way, the decision to bring in Jin looks less like a random pick from a group of 7 equally qualified candidates and more like a calculated slot in a broader regional strategy, one where Gucci was clearly looking for figures who carried both massive reach and a specific kind of public trust. Jin, fresh off a completed military service that many Korean audiences view as a mark of genuine character, fit that specific moment with unusual precision. Here's something that puts the "is he really deserving" question into sharper context. Gucci wasn't the only major brand racing to sign Jin after his discharge. Just weeks earlier, Jin had been named the first ever global ambassador for the French luxury jewelry house Fred. He also picked up partnerships with skincare brand Laneige and was reported to be serving as a tourism ambassador for the city of Seoul. Then, in October 2024, American athletic apparel brand Alo Yoga announced Jin as its newest global ambassador as well. In other words, Gucci was not making an isolated, eccentric bet on an underqualified member. Multiple major global brands operating independently in different industries all reached the same conclusion within a matter of months. That's not one house's quirky opinion. That's a market signal. When the Gucci announcement actually dropped, the online reaction reflected that same appetite. Fans reported Gucci's Japan website experiencing technical issues shortly after the news broke, with social media flooding with reactions dubbing it the Seokjin impact. Whether that specific traffic surge was measured officially or not, the sheer volume of fan excitement in the hours after the announcement was, by any account, enormous. This is our second open loop closing. We asked whether Gucci's choice reflected something the public didn't fully see. Increasingly, it looks like the public did see it. The brands were simply the ones catching up to what Army had known for over a decade. But if we're being honest about what actually earns a moment like this, it isn't spreadsheets, chart positions, or ambassador rosters. It's a live stream that happened months before any of it. Think back to June 12, 2024. A man walks out of a military base in a uniform and a black beret, hugging fellow servicemen he'd spent 18 months alongside. He gets onto a live stream that evening surrounded by balloons reading, "Jin is back," and he doesn't perform composure. He tells 3 million people watching that he cried. He tells them it was fun anyway. He thanks the people who came out to welcome him home. That is not the behavior of someone managing a brand relaunch. That's a person being unmistakably, unguardedly himself on the very day he had the least reason to be anything else. Every fashion house on earth can write a press release about authenticity and magnetism. Almost none of them can point to a moment as genuinely unscripted as that live stream and say, "This is the person we're representing us." Gucci could. And whatever calculations went into the decision behind closed doors, that moment is the truest evidence available that Jin's public warmth isn't a performance built for cameras. It's just who he is, whether 3 people are watching or 3 million. That's the answer to our sharpest question. What tips the scale for a house like Gucci isn't the coldest, most sculpted image on offer. It's proof, real, unscripted, hard to fake, that the person can carry warmth at scale. Jin had been proving that for over a decade, in interviews and live streams, in a self-given nickname that somehow made an entire fandom smile instead of cringe. Gucci didn't invent that quality. They simply recognized it. So why did Gucci choose Jin? Not because the other 6 members of BTS lacked fashion credibility. They clearly didn't, with Dior, Celine, Cartier, Calvin Klein, Valentino, and Louis Vuitton all making that obvious. And not because Jin needed rescuing from irrelevance. His solo chart numbers in 2024 said otherwise, loudly. Gucci chose him because, by their own stated words, they were looking for magnetism built on warmth and generosity, not distance. They found an artist who had spent over a decade turning self-deprecating humor into global affection, who gave away meaningful sums to children's causes without asking for credit, who served his country without complaint, and who cried on a live stream instead of pretending he didn't. None of that makes the other 6 members any less deserving of the partnerships they earned. This was never a competition with one correct winner. It was 7 different artists, 7 different identities, and 7 different houses recognizing 7 different kinds of value. Jin's kind of value simply happened to be exactly what one storied Italian house was searching for at exactly the moment he walked back into public life. If there's a lesson in this whole story, it's a simple one. Sometimes the most convincing brand isn't built. It's just lived consistently for over a decade until the world finally catches up and puts a label on it. So here's a question worth sitting with as you close this video. What is it about Jen, beyond the suits, beyond the campaigns, that made you an army in the first place? Because whatever that answer is for you, chances are it's the same thing Gucci saw too.